you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Never tell me the odds.
The greatest idea in human history, the theory of evolution by natural selection.
You must unlearn what you have learned.
As a mate with destiny. In order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive.
We're living in captivity, and it's time to break free.
Welcome to A Wilder Life with Eric Edmeades.
Hi, Eric Edmeades here, and today on A Wilder Life, we're going to go deep into the connection between our thoughts, our bodies, and the stories we tell ourselves with somebody who's dedicated her life to helping others break free from limiting patterns. Debra Heslin is a high-performance coach, a master NLP trainer, and a resilience expert who left the corporate grind to help other people reclaim their health, clarity, and joy. And as you guys all know, I often talk about the idea of us running sort of ancient software in this modern world and the disconnects that it creates. And I think that Debra she's going to provide some fascinating insights into her view on that as well. Debra, really wonderful to have you here on the show.
Well, I'm definitely honored to be here because I love this topic, and we know that we love talking about things that we love, right? So this is fun for me. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Let's start with that. I'm always fascinated by origins. I'm always fascinated by what drives someone to work in a particular area, whether they're wanting to paint or they're wanting to speak or whatever it is. And you're in the corporate world. I'm assuming there's a relative level of safety and, salary bubble and all that kind of stuff. And then one day you're like, I'm not really feeling called in that. What happened? Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So I was the general manager, this little girl from Australia. Goodness knows how I got this role, but I was the general manager of John F. Kennedy Airport for a major airline in the United States. And it was during that time where I was considered a high-performing leader that I had nothing but stress and anxiety inside my inner world. It may not have shown on the outer world because I was considered a high-performing leader, but what was going on inside me, I didn't know how to handle. It was the stress, the anxiety, the long hours, the feeling of, am I good enough here? The imposter syndrome, such as, how did I get this job? Am I doing a good enough job? And it was, funny enough, it was at the happiest time of my life. I was getting remarried. My girls were all grown and married. I had a beautiful home. My husband was just like incredible, right? And I was very unhappy on the inside. It was because I did not know how to manage the stress and the anxiety where I could literally function. And what I ended up doing, I actually had a panic attack on a plane, and here I am, a leader, and they're treating me for what they thought was a heart attack, and the doctor says you're in perfect health. You had what's called a classic panic attack. So that led me to doing yoga. I started doing yoga. And from that, my oldest daughter always laughs at me. She says, Mom, you always have to take it to the nth degree when you do something. So I became a master yoga teacher in that path as well while I'm still working in the airline business. But I did not understand why in a yoga room, because I've always worked out, I would either cry or laugh, or there were different emotions that would pop up with me. And when I was out of the yoga room, an hour later, I'd feel that stress and that anxiety again. So I wanted to keep that with me after I left the room, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that really does. It highlights a couple of, my mom just wrote this piece on LinkedIn I saw this morning, actually, and she was writing about the sort of distinction between, say, depression and melancholy. And it really hit home for me because, I've definitely gone through my trials and tribulations, the pandemic years, and went through a divorce, and a variety of things were more challenging than I might have chosen for myself during that time. And there were days where I was like, is this depression? Like, I really would have these days where I'm like, is this an anxiety? And it was interesting reading my mom's piece today. She was talking about this idea of melancholy, recognizing that, maybe being sad or being afraid or being a little anxious about stuff isn't in of itself a bad thing.
Correct.
It's a message in some way. And so I guess what I would say is, what was one of the earliest aha moments you had where you're like, okay, I think I've resolved this for myself, and now I'm really feeling compelled to share this with other people?
Yeah. So what happened was, when I was working at this airline, as I had said, I always have to go further with my studies. In my strengths finder, learning is my number one strength.
Right.
So I'm constantly wanting to learn, and I want to understand the reason why something is the way that it is. So even what you were saying about your mum's article, I went to the doctor and I told him I'm depressed. And he said to me, actually, you're not. You're just unhappy with some of your choices. And I won't tell you what I wanted to say to him, but he was so awesome in how he helped me. He said, I suggest you go on a yoga retreat and you learn to find out what it is inside of you that you really, really want to be doing. And so that led me to like, well, maybe this, and like you started it off with Eric, or it may have been where you said to me before we even started, right? I had a high-powered job, a lot of prestige, a job that people wanted, all the accolades, you know, security financially, et cetera, but because I was unhappy on the inside, right, it didn't mean anything.
Yeah.
So I ended up leaving that. It took me 3 years to resign. It was a long process where they kept working things out with me and all of that. And they were wonderful. They were really wonderful. They're probably, what's wrong with this girl? She's a wackadoo, you know. No one wants to leave. They want the promotions, you know. And they actually, some of the leaders there became my first clients. So I started to study. When I studied yoga, that led me to other forms of why we believe what we believe, what stories are going on in our mind that create not only the belief that we have, but the emotions around the story that leads to our attitudes, our behaviors, and ultimately our results. Yeah, so my very first job, I started teaching yoga. So I went from a high-powered, good six-figure income with lots of benefits to $40 a day teaching yoga. Yeah.
You know, there's something really powerful about that. And I mean, anytime any of us are making a career or a job decision, there's a variety of factors, right? And I think many employers make the mistake of thinking that money is the primary factor. And it might be the most urgent factor because, you know, we have to pay the rent and eat food and so on. But it often isn't the highest factor. But I'm always impressed when I see somebody surrender tremendous financial security and then also financial liberty and surrender that for something that's greater. And I think I value it to some degree because I've been through that a few times in my life. The conversation you had with your doctor reminds me of a conversation that I had with a coach or mentor of mine. I was running a business of mine and I became despondent. I didn't want to be there anymore. We were in the barcode data capture logistics management system business. I was sick of it. I was so sick of it that I didn't even want to scan my own groceries at the grocery store. It was like driving me crazy. And then I went to my mentor and I said, I'm in deep trouble. I can't wake up in the morning. I don't want to go to work. And he goes, well, then you should sell the company. And I'm like, well, it's not there. It's not at that level. It's not big enough for that. It's not solid enough for that. And he goes, well, then you better get your act together. You're going to have to sort that out. But then he did something very, very powerful. He said to me, when was the last time your business gave you goosebumps? When was the last time your business really resonated with you? And I relayed a story to him about one of my employees who'd been long-term unemployed before she came to work with us. And I helped her reorganize all of her debt and reorganize her stuff and pay it all off. And it was just great. And then another one of my employees, again, long-term unemployed, after working for us, I helped them get the mortgage and they moved into their house. And I kept relaying these stories. And then my mentor goes, you notice not one of those stories has anything to do with logistics management, barcode scanning. You are running a personal development company that's disguised as a data capture company. The minute I realized that, it meant that I could hire a managing director to run the technical aspects of the business, and I could become effectively the HR manager of the company and do what I really love doing. And it was because of that that I was able to sell that company a few years later, and happily so. So it sounds like that's kind of what you want to help people to do.
Yes.
Get them to the place where they can follow a path similar to what you did. It seems though you have a number of different disciplines in there. I mean, you've got some sort of traditional psychology disciplines, you've done some neurolinguistic programming training, and then I even read you've done some digging into Huna. So
Yeah.
you unpack the
I love
multidiscipline.
Huna. I love them all. And I love what you said, right? Because the old saying, when you're doing what you love, it's not work, right? And I also have a little saying to myself, if I'm not loving what I am doing, this is my personal thing, and I sometimes share it with my students when I'm teaching or even my clients. If I'm not loving what I'm doing, I need to check my attitude, or I need to change what I'm doing, because I'm responsible for that. You know, it's my inner world that is being affected here. So Huna, I bring it into my coaching realms, I bring it into my teaching environments. I love to do workshops on it, and I love the ancient teachings, because if we just stick with some of those, you know, today it's all about gadgets and what else can I do and more of, and more clients, more money, etc. But really we don't need more. We need less, and we need more breathing, right? If we want to put it that way, but we need less of the chaos. So Huna means secret, and it doesn't mean, shh, don't tell anybody. It means it's ancient, and people are turning back to some of these ancient realms, like yoga, for example, as well. But a lot of it is about, well, one of the things that I love to teach is about breath work, because our breath is free. It's an ancient tool that we come into the world with. It's the last thing we leave the world with. And Huna teaches about the elements with breath work. So would you like me to go into a little more detail about?
You know, I'll tell you what
Yeah.
I want to share something, but I want to
Yes.
hear your take on this first.
Yeah.
I years ago, over 20
Yeah.
years ago, when I was first getting involved in studying neurolinguistics and what have you, I went to Hawaii, and very good friends of mine were very good friends with Tad and Artie
Oh,
James.
wow.
And
I studied with Tad. I worked for them, actually.
oh, I've got you. Okay, maybe you knew Wayne or Topher Morrison. He worked for them years and years and years before, and anyway, so we went over to Hawaii one time, and that was the first time I'd kind of, gone in, had this Huna experience. And I remember them talking about the connections that we have with people, this sort of Aka connection that we have.
Yeah,
Maybe
correct.
focus in on that a little, because I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Aka connection is a cord. It comes from inside you, and we're all energy, so we're connected to everyone and everything. So with the Aka connection, some of what I love to do with that, if there's a connection I want to break with somebody because it is not necessarily in my realm of consciousness that I want to be a part of, it's just not a good energy, I can break that connection through a forgiveness technique. And the Ho'oponopono is not what you hear on the mainstream. It's done a little bit differently, but it's where you can send out your accords of forgiveness to what it is you're consciously noticing in that person or that energy or that experience, that environment, and you can forgive. You can have a conversation for yourself on a stage and forgive, imaginary of course, and you forgive whatever it is around that is happening. And then you break that Aka connection between you and them. No, you send it out to the universe for universal healing, right? But it's you doing it for you. Not saying they're wrong, they're bad, or anything like that. You're able to let go of that connection that is causing you the frustration, the anxiety, the grief, whatever it is around that. And you also have the ability to recreate that connection anytime you choose.
You see, okay, I feel like if you look at the realm of personal development and you were to use a political spectrum, like the left and the right, say, on the left, you might have Wayne Dyer and Abraham Hicks and Huna. And then over on the right, you might have like Brian Tracy and, the guys that are like telling you, like, I'm trying to think of the sports performance one that the coaching, the doing, the action. It strikes me that you really have to have a foot in both camps. The movie The
100%.
Secret was made entirely on the one side. And so when I went to that workshop, I would argue that I was very much on the right action taking side. I was into setting goals, action plans, morning routines, making it happen. And we went to this program and we were hanging out with Tad, and he said, let me show you something. He showed us this whole idea of the Aka connection. And he talked about the importance of breaking connection in order to rebuild sometimes.
Yes.
And there was a woman in my life, a woman in my father's life, actually, who I'd been very close with, but we just kind of had drifted apart and I couldn't understand why. And we did this exercise and just severed it, offered forgiveness into it, and that was the end of it. And no kidding, for the first time in 6 months, she just called me the next morning, like that. Now I know these magical things happen around workshops, and we all want to we all want to go, it can't just be a coincidence. It has to have
Right.
significance.
Right.
But the truth is, I then started building when I'm doing public presentations and I'm going out in front of big audiences, I started doing a meditation based on that Aka connection to pre-connect with the audience before I got there. And I got to tell you, for me, it's incredibly grounding and powerful.
100%. And, because that energy is holding us back personally when we're holding in, right? It's where we're really not seeing kind of everything, excuse me, that we could be seeing as wonderful whole, because everything is happening. I don't use this lightly, for purpose and for reasons, right? Whether we understand it or not. But if we're not open to seeing, I used to be so close-minded on certain things. No, it needed to be this way. It needed to be that way. Now I've let go of that attachment. So when you break that Aka connection of what is holding you back from healing, or the what we call the negative emotions, the major negative emotions that you're still holding on to, and you don't even remember the reason why you even had it. You just know there was something there. Or somebody else can trigger that in you from something from the past. I've had those experiences where I'll have a negative experience with somebody and the person is not even them. So I'm able to break that connection from something that's holding me having an open, full connection with this person or this group, and not be so close-minded. Yeah, it's all about forgiveness. And, there's been so many studies that have been done around we're forgiving for ourselves so that we can move forward. And then when we do that, like what you said with this other person, it just sends out an energy that we're not even consciously aware of. It really is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I had a really crazy version of it once where I had to go meet a director of a publicly traded company in the UK. I was living there at the time and my company was bidding for a project with them. And I did this pre-meeting connection thing that I had developed from what I'd learned from Tad. And I'm not kidding you. I showed up in W1 London the next morning. I walked into the office building, walked into the boardroom, and the guy that I'd never met before, who was a director of a publicly traded retail company, walked up and gave me a hug hello. This is Britain, by the way, just to underscore the point. And, it really, I don't know who was more surprised by that, him or me. Honestly, we were both like, how did that happen?
There was that connection.
Yeah. And it really, for me, it opened up the door to the practical versus esoteric question. The esoteric question is it true that I did a meditation, I sent my energy up into the ether and it connected with him and it made him feel good about me, and so we had a good first impression? That's kind of out there. But then at a minimum, is it true that by doing that, I created a sense of energetic familiarity with him? I made myself feel comfortable and confident. I had told him in that meditation that he was safe in my hands, that I would take care of things for him. And so when I walked in the room, did I simply have the right energy in that moment? And I don't care either way.
Exactly. It doesn't matter, because ultimately, what is the result that we were getting? And that ties into our belief systems. If I believe what I am doing is giving me a better connection with what it is I'm going to do, isn't that a better belief to have than, well, this meeting's going to suck and this person is this way and that way, right? That is going to be immediately felt energetically. Why? Those things have been scientifically proven of how you're, bringing it to modern day with the HeartMath Institute, that I love their work also, right? It can be from our heart, can radiate out, and it can be felt. So much with people, it gets transmitted, just like our cell phone can send pictures. It's the same thing from our heart's energetic field to others, and unconscious mind to unconscious mind. It feels it.
Yeah, absolutely. Funny you mentioned HeartMath. I met Howard and Debra for the first time when I was at a mastermind. I'm in an authors collective mastermind called the Transformational Leadership Council. And they were there, and I met them in a raft, whitewater rafting down a river in Colorado.
Oh, wow.
It was it. Cool. And of course, went out to go see their place afterward and just love the work that they're doing.
Yes, it's wonderful.
Let's say that one mindset shift that would be helpful, that you've already underscored, is an openness to possibility that there is another way. That I think that's a huge mindset shift. Given that, what's another mindset shift that you would suggest is imperative for somebody that really wants to make a shift and increase their, let's say, enjoyment of this very convoluted, complicated modern life?
Yeah, I would say what popped into my mind right away, so I'm going to say what popped in is our perceptions. Because our perceptions become our reality, become our outcomes, become just everything, what we believe, and I actually just did a workshop for a company out in Houston. I get mixed up between Houston and Austin, so I have to recall where I was. It was in Houston, and it was all on perceptions along with mindset, and what we perceive to be our truth. We want to question, especially when it's not working for us. If it's working for us, awesome, grab more of that. But when we have these perceptions, from obviously if you've done work with TAD and stuff, the moment we observe something, it becomes we've created our perception of what that is. The moment you saw me, you could gather your perceptions of who I am, what I do, what I might be like, and I can do the same thing with you. So it's the observation right away in our perceptions that can create our realities. Yeah. So I like to check, what am I perceiving, or help my clients with that. What am I perceiving in this situation that I'm having this negative charge, or I'm having a charge that really doesn't sit well with what I like to believe and what is ultimately important to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, but that obviously raises an interesting issue, is that there are a reasonable belief in many people that they don't have influence over that. In other words, events take place and their perception is given to them, or their perception is the reaction or the response. I'm always really, in my coaching and consulting practice, one of the biggest things I'm trying to do is open a space up between stimulus and response. How do you do that? Speak to that. How would you support me in making that?
I love that you say that, because I just had a conversation with a client yesterday about that. And it was an Israeli company actually that I was talking to about the pause between stimulus and response, right? The way that I like to talk about that, this is my mouse, this is coming into me, the stimulus is coming into me. And the moment that I'm aware of either what I'm feeling or what popped up inside of me, as human beings, that gives us the moment to take a breath. And now we have a choice. I can respond this way, right? I can now look at it like this, go for whatever that is coming that way. Or in that moment, that 1 second, now I have a choice of what I want to do. So it's the awareness between the stimulus and the response, which I like to refer to as a breath. Mum used to say count to 10, right? It's really only count to 1, or take a breath in that moment, because that gives you the pause so we can be less reactionary, go to a place of regret. We want to learn how to respond, and taking a breath gives us a response. And in that response, if I just always do the same thing, I don't see anything else that I could do. That is still there. That same response is still there. But now I've moved that out of the way. It's still in the universe, right? That I could respond that way. But now look at all my choices I have. And oh my goodness, they're behind me, they're below me, they're above me. I open myself up for so many more options than my normal stimulus response, which is anchoring.
Yeah. I like that a lot. I think one of the books that's had the biggest impact on me as a person was Viktor Frankl's.
Yeah, that was the one I was trying to recall. That's the one.
I wondered.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting what we talk about. So in one of my companies, WildFit, we help people retrain their relationship with food. And of course, I mean, what is more automatic than our relationship with food? See it, want it, buy it, eat it, stuff it, chew it, swallow it. It's very, very automatic behavior.
Yes.
And so one of the things that we talk about creating for our clients is what we call Frankl moments. And the Frankl moments is driven from that concept of our last ultimate freedom is the freedom to choose our response right there. And so it really, I think, a massive component to making life work in today's day of distraction and so on is the ability to do exactly what you described, to say, hey, this is what's going on, and I'm going to assess the meaning that makes the most sense here rather than the one that just came to me.
I love what you said. I'm going to actually borrow that, the Frankl response, because his book is masterful. And,
Yeah.
if he can get a different response on what he went through, I think that most of us in today's society could choose, because it's a choice. We're given that gift as human beings that we have a choice on being in charge and responsible. The company in Israel wants me to help the employees with that, with their response to the stresses that are going on, in their environment, right? So we
Yeah.
have a choice. We're responsible for our response. We are. We can't blame. We can, but it doesn't help us to blame. Listen, no one was a better blamer than me. Right? I blamed the fact that I had to move here, blamed the fact that I had to land in New York, blamed the fact of this. And I thought I was a positive person
Right.
until I became aware of my dialogue with myself.
I used to run these leadership programs where I would take people up Kilimanjaro, and it was quite a metaphor. You can do board breaking and firewalking, but I can tell you there's something about climbing that mountain that's pretty real.
Yes.
And we would often do an exercise coming down the mountain, unpacking what it took to complete this incredible metaphor. And of course, people very often, it's very easy for them to describe their turnaround moments, what was positive, the strengths they had, acknowledge others for helping them, and so on. But one day we really decided to switch the focus around and say, yeah, but what did you learn about your darker side? And I'll never forget this one guy I laid out this exercise and nobody said anything for like 10 minutes. Like nobody said anything. Like it was just a very dark exercise. And finally, this one guy, French guy, came out and he goes, I realized what it is. He says, I blame everybody for everything. And he goes, look, I'm climbing up that mountain and I hated you. And he's pointing at me. He goes, I hated you for making me come here. And then, Ruth over here, she's a school teacher, came on the trip. She's about one apple taller than a Smurf. And she's walking up the mountain, smiling and laughing. And I hated her. And then he goes, and by the way, my business partner keeps on letting me do deals that don't work. And I hate him. And it was so interesting.
That's
of course,
awesome.
as he's layering this out, he's realizing, holy, no responsibility being taken at all. It's funny, it's the downside of living in the Caribbean. We often have double backup power. It's been working absolutely fine. And then for some reason, it didn't save our connection.
Yeah. I like this. It was absolutely perfect, Eric, because it's the stimulus and response. Things going to happen. I now have a choice with all the curse words in China. Who can I blame? It wasn't me. Or I can just go, well, we're fixing it.
Debra, one of the things that I think a lot about is something that we call the hindsight window. Basically, the idea of the hindsight window is that a hindsight window is a window of time between a bad event and the day that you realize it wasn't a bad event, and that maybe even it was the best event ever. For example, somebody gets fired from their job, they're angry, resentful, and they're hurt. And then 4 years later, they're like, wow, if I hadn't gotten fired, I wouldn't have all this, right? And in essence, the idea is, at least in my estimation, the idea is to shorten that window as much as possible. The longer that window is open, the more unpleasantness in your life. And so I guess in that context, what would you advise to somebody who's, say, going exactly through the stimulus response thing? They've just been fired, they've just been dumped, something really harsh has hit them, and they want to close that window as quickly as possible, but they also don't want to push it under the rug.
Correct, because it's still there when you push it under the rug.
What would you, how would you help them?
No, I love that. And I love the way that you refer to it as a hindsight. So I'm working with the CEO right now that traumas and tribulations of that role that he has. And we refer to it as what is the learning experience, the positive learning experience that you gained from what transpired. Because life is going to happen. One of the things he said to me recently, he said, I just wish it was a smooth sailing, a smooth road for a while. And I said, life, one of the 6 hard truths of life is not meant to be easy. We're given the opportunity to learn from those experiences, to be able to not repeat it continually. So I'm getting a little bit off track, but that reminds me of a Buddha philosophy that I learned. Buddha says, I don't know if he really does, but this is what I heard. Buddha says we're always going to have 84 problems. So is it the same 84? Or have we been able to, in hindsight, learn from what transpired as quickly as we can? What emotion am I feeling? Where does that land in my body? What sensations come with that? And then what is my response to that? Was it useful or helpful? They're my two favorite. Was it useful or helpful? If it was, keep doing it. If it wasn't, again, what else, right? What else could I do and have learned from that? And sometimes I'll get them to find 3 positive things that they could take with them into their future.
Yeah, one of my favorite questions in that moment is, or series of questions is, how am I feeling right now?
Yeah.
And is this emotional state the optimal emotional state for solving this problem?
Yeah.
And if not, what would be a better emotional state? And then how could I get there?
That's right.
And, you know, I really, I've had some interesting circumstances in my life. I was in a casino in the Bahamas once when 4 guys walked in with assault rifles and started shooting. And, you know, it's like in that moment, you have anxiety and fear and all that kind of stuff. But the truth is that in that moment, that might not actually be the best emotional state to be processing what was going on. And it was really fascinating. I stopped, I broke down what was happening. I found a more rational mindset, and I got myself and my partner to safety in a way that I still to this day don't know how I managed to do that so quickly. But it was effectively a combination of what you and I are describing. I'm going to respond to this situation and not simply react out of my, you know, ancient brain.
Exactly. Because the automatic response is, you know, fight, flight, or freeze, right?
Yeah.
But the secondary response can kick in if we're aware of what's going on with the stimulus. And then we have so many choices that we didn't realize that we could do in that moment, for sure.
Let's go to sort of it's one thing to handle these things as they're happening, as we're talking about, but then there's also some things that we can do maybe in our normal day-to-day lives that make us more generally resilient anyway.
Yeah.
So that we're better prepared when life's interesting events take place. So what would you describe as some sort of impactful practices, you know, just practices, routines, habits that they could take on to make sure they're more resilient, more prepared?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of a morning routine, right? So I do a morning routine. I encourage my clients to do what is the morning routine. It doesn't matter what it is. It's so long as your brain knows this is going to be what I'm doing every single day. So it starts off the day. You know, I drink, you know, 32 ounces of water right away in the morning. And then I'll do some breathing work. So going to your question, what are some great tools that people can do? It's really going to your breath, because the more that you practice, the more your nervous system is going to be able to shift and reset when stuff hits the fan. Right? Because it's going to. If we think it never is going to happen, we're really living in a fantasy world. So it's us being able to have that response set because we've practiced to be able to do something. So I like to use either the elemental breathing exercises that I do for myself and I also teach, or the HeartMath breathing techniques, where the heart, and this is all science, which is wonderful, the heart sends more signals to the brain than the other way around. The heart was formed in the womb. It's not just an organ that pumps blood. It does so much more. So when we are focusing our attention on the heart, and as we breathe in, we maybe bring in a renewing emotion such as kindness, gratitude, joy, laughter, compassion, whatever it is we want to bring in. That is going to send a signal up to the thalamus, right? First of all, the amygdala to the thalamus, which then sends directly to our frontal lobe, which is where we make our decisions. So if we're training our heart to go into a coherent rhythm rather than erratic, and we're taking care of our inner world, then that is going to send a signal to our frontal lobe. We are going to make better decisions in that moment. So go ahead.
No, I was just thinking about the morning routine thing. I'll tell you that when the morning miracle routine thing took off, started talking about it and became all the Instagram craze and stuff. Instagram rage, I should say. I rebel. I'm like, no, I mean, my life is so unroutine. I'm in a different time zone for so many days. You know, I have to be on stage at this one and that one, and I thrive in this. But if I really break down what you've said and I really think about it from a Paleolithic perspective, and most of the work that I do is inspired by evolutionary biology and psychology. If I think about this, for our ancestors, they didn't have a morning routine. They just had a routine that happened every morning. they didn't need a checklist. Right?
That's awesome.
They got up in the morning,
Exactly.
and I've done embedded stays with some of the last hunter-gatherer tribes on Earth, and I can tell you, there's a routine to it. And as I was thinking about that and processing what you're saying, I was thinking, hold on now, if I have a morning routine, first of all, I've cut down on the number of decisions I need to make. Immediately, right? Like, you know, the old Steve Jobs thing. I don't want to wear out my decision engine. Well, if I don't have a morning routine, that means every morning I have to wake up and decide
What I'm going to do.
Exactly. So then I've got that. Plus, on top of that, I am using less energy because if I'm following a routine, I'm following existing neurology. I'm following existing neural pathways. I'm not having to drive entirely new thoughts. So that's less energy. I'm also under less stress because there's a general familiarity to what it is that I'm doing and not a lot of unknowns. And so it strikes me that there's a certain value in that from a resilience perspective, because
100%.
if your mornings are super varied, you're already under a degree of stress. Gosh, I'm gonna have to I'm actually gonna have to rethink my morning routine philosophy.
It helps me. Then I've done something for myself, no matter what. So I have, you know, as I mentioned, my CEO client, depending if I'm in Tennessee or Florida, it's either 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. a few days a week, a few mornings a week. I do not blame him for my not being able to do my morning routine. So on those days, I will get up earlier to make sure that I do my morning routine. I've done my 45 minutes of full body workout, which I do every single day. And then I do my 30 minutes of cardio, whatever that is. So it's a minimum of a 75-minute workout every day. I'm going to be next month. When I was working in the airline, I looked like I was 70, and that's 15 years ago. You know, because I take care of myself. And part of that is a morning routine. And it's drinking my water, and I have it with my Himalayan salt and half a lemon. And I do those things that are nourishing my body, because we have the four bodies, right? The mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. So what am I, and all lands in the physical. When we're not taking care of the mental, emotional, and the spiritual, what am I doing to support those other bodies?
I know yoga is a big part of this for you. In fact, one of my very good friends is Peggy Cappy.
Okay.
And Peggy Cappy sort of popularized on PBS, and she created that yoga for the rest of us and introduced yoga to millions and millions of people. And I had a YouTube show during the pandemic that we called Thrive Time. And it was all about giving people the tools and resources to get through lockdowns. And, you know, I had parenting experts because, hey, you got to live with your kids now. I had relationship experts because you got to live with your relationship now. But, you know, I have to say, Peggy came on and you know, I know her quite well. We see each other. As a matter of fact, she came with me to go visit the Hadzabe people in Africa at one stage. And we've just had an incredible history together. But she really did inspire me about that. So even on my fairly unroutined lifestyle, a major part of my regular cycle is doing some general stretching and yoga type stuff in the mornings just to keep my blood going. And same with her. I mean, you look fantastic. I would never guess her age based on her appearance, and certainly not based on her vibe and her flexibility and so on. Youth can be attained. It just takes a little effort.
I don't want to survive. I want to thrive. I've got 8 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren. I love to play football with my grandson, who's faster than me now. I don't want to just be making it up the stairs and things. So I believe that doing that is having no excuses, not blaming my work, not blaming my early flights that I have sometimes going back and forth between Tennessee and Florida, and sometimes New York as well, on not being able to do it. If I can't do it in the morning, I will still do my early morning routine with my water and some breathing, because that's easy, right? I will find another time during the day to be able to do the physical, because
you've made it a non-negotiable. It's got to be
non-negotiable. It goes before everything, because otherwise I'm blaming the environment, the circumstances around me for not doing what's important to me. You know, it doesn't mean I love always.
No, it's true. It's really true. I mean, I am. It's cliched at this point, but you know, if you take the easy path, you end up with a difficult life. And
Love that.
it's you know, it's very true. And I feel like the workouts that I wanted to do, and then I did, I don't know how to put this, but they don't have nearly as much value as the workouts I didn't want to do and did.
Interesting. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. That's a
Um,
really important way to say it. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if I've quite articulated that way, but I'm glad I heard that. I needed to hear that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me ask you, I mean, I'm sure there are many people that have inspired you along the way. Who are some of the people that just really help to empower you or shape you in following your passion and your mission?
Well, Tad was one of them for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
I was fortunate enough to get to know him before he passed away, so I was fortunate enough for that. There are a lot of people, but I'd say the very first person was Louise Hay, believe it or
Of
not.
course.
And I'll never forget, like when I read her book, that was the beginning of my journey. Before going into the airline industry and all of that, it was with the two 4-year-old boys. And one was brought up, you're amazing, you can accomplish anything you want, you can do this, you can do that. And the other one was told, you'll never be good at this, you'll never be able to do this, etc., etc. And those are the words that we say to ourselves. So that had a huge impact on me by recognizing what were the words I was saying to myself. And, from there, of course, I went to Wayne Dyer, Tony Robbins. I've always attended many of his things. I've been fortunate enough to actually train some of his coaches, which was pretty awesome for me, where they wanted to learn NLP. So that was like, yeah, I felt good, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There's so many people. Robin Sharma, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, that book had a huge influence on me. My yoga teacher that taught me, and the list can go on and on.
I share some common ground. Actually, Robin grew up about 5 miles away from me in Nova Scotia.
Oh, wow.
We didn't know each other as kids, but I did an event with him in Toronto
What
many
was
years
that?
ago at this
Yeah.
point. And funny enough, maybe the most important person in my business life today used to run his business. So we
Wow.
definitely, there's definitely some common ground there for sure.
Cool stuff.
and-
Louise Hay. Jack Canfield was somebody else as well. He actually is the one that got me started on neuro-linguistic programming.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
He's a very, very good friend of mine.
Oh, wow.
yeah,
I was very impressed with his training that I'm one of his trainers actually on his success principles and that. And I was very impressed with his training, and his E plus R equals O is all cause and effect, right?
Yeah.
And how he made a 4-hour workshop out of cause and effect, right? I always go back to that. And it's the same with ahimsa. In yoga, you're non-harming. What are you doing to not harm yourself or taking responsibility for to create the life that you want? He was instrumental in my...
Jack is very much the embodiment of that thing I was describing to you. You have like Deepak Chopra and
Yeah.
like the Abraham Hicks and
Yes.
all that stuff's way out there. And then you've got, Tony Robbins and Brian Tracy. But Jack has really stood in that middle place, bringing practical to spiritual in a really, really solid way. He's been,
Love his work.
a dear friend and father figure to me for 2 decades. He's been a
awesome.
phenomenal guy.
It's interesting how much we have in common like that, though, right?
Yeah.
It's really cool. People have
Yeah,
studied.
well, even Louise Hay, I mean, I was very inspired by her young, and then of course that turned me on to Wayne Dyer. And so when it came time for me to do books and stuff, I proactively chose to work with Hay House largely because of the influence of Louise Hay and Wayne and
Wow.
small world.
Yes.
Let me ask you this then. I guess our followers, I get people writing to me on Instagram all the time, and it's clear that they believe that I've arrived at some magical, mystical place where everything's perfect in my life. and I'm always writing to them going, no, sorry, no. What are some of the present day challenges that you're wrestling with these days?
Yeah, I love that you even say that. Sometimes when I start my workshops, when I go to companies and that, I'll say, so who here has no anxiety or stress in their life? And no one raises their hand. And it's like, I was hoping somebody could take over this and teach me, because we're going to have that. Some of my challenges, I would say there could be numerous challenges. I feel that I want to make sure that the coaching industry is not diluted. I want to, when I teach and stuff, I always want to over deliver, give so much value in what I do. So I'm constantly learning and studying, and I like to do everything myself so that I understand it more. But some of the challenges can be finding time between family, traveling back and forth. I have family in New York, I have family in Tennessee, I have family in Australia. So it can be those sort of challenges. And then it can be making sure you're always delivering to your clients. I've had the loss of a 2.5-year-old grandchild last year. So that's been, so I've learned a lot about grief. I've taught about grief. Grief can come in many different forms, not just from loss of a loved one. But those are challenges for sure that I've had to apply my tools, because without it, I would be having that panic attack. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I really do.
Yeah. So, life is, as I always say, life is going to throw, and I don't like to refer them as challenges, as opportunities for us to be a better person today than we were yesterday.
Yeah, I saw Morgan Freeman. I'm sure it was a line in a movie or something, but he says, when you pray to God and ask for forgiveness, God doesn't just grant you forgiveness. God gives you things to learn forgiveness about. Yeah. You pray to God and ask for strength. God doesn't just bestow strength upon you. Yeah. God gives you circumstances to build your strength. And that there's something about that. We all know the expression, life is always happening for you and not to you. But right. I like to modify that a little. I'm like, life is always happening for you, not to you, especially when it doesn't feel that way. And I think there's something there's something in that, we did not come here into this existence for everything to be perfect and easy in the way we 100%. Want it to be. I would argue that depending on our person's spiritual beliefs, we arguably left a world where everything was perfect and easy and the way you want it to be, and came here to experience the contrast so that we could actually have a range of emotional experience.
There you go. I like that. That's kind of like the Buddha philosophy, right? Where Buddha had to go out. He hadn't experienced unhappiness. He'd only experienced happiness. And so therefore went out into the real world and saw suffering. So yeah, I like that. And, ultimately, without getting morbid, because I'm not meaning it that way, we're all going to pass off in this lifetime. So I like to look at it as, how are we living? Who am I being while I'm living in this world, so that I can look back, where we're doing that, looking back on our life and things that have happened. How can I now learn from that to do better? Mm-hmm. So I don't need to repeat that. So I like to do reflecting, but not to live in the story or the history of what's happened. I like to look back to be able to make my situation with anything that I come in contact with better. Yeah.
I think that's a nice frame. If you seek to go to a meeting so that everything is better, you seek to go to a party so that the party itself is better, you seek to go to a family dinner so that everything is better. That is not a consistent intention in my experience. And so I think it's a great way to approach it. Debra, tell me, how do people find you? They want to know more. They want to work with you. How do they find you?
Yeah, so my website is Debra Heslin, and it's debraheslinwellness.com. I also have another one that is debraheslin.com. So you can find me on either of those. And then on debraheslinwellness.com, it lists a lot of the different things that I do and that I teach and workshops that I run, etc. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Well, we'll make sure to post the links in the show notes and such. And I'm really glad we had the show. Given the common threads that we have, I imagine that we'll probably cross paths again.
I hope so. Yeah.
It's just been a real honor to have you guys on the show. And for all you guys that are watching, what I want to remind you is that there are certain nuggets, and these days in the shortened attention economy, sending out a podcast to people is a wonderful thing to do. But what you really want to do is say to your friends, hey, you know what? At 18 minutes, Eric and Debra talked about this. And when you really give them that extra guidance, it'll make sure they find the information that they really need to make sure that they get the highest degree of value. With that said, please make sure you like and comment and subscribe and do all the normal things you're supposed to do with podcasts. And I will see you on the next episode of A Wilder Life. I'm Eric Edmeades, your host. And once again, Debra, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of A Wilder Life. Please leave a review and share it. Wilder Life with Eric Edmeades.